how do you respond to hurting events in your life? You know, when you think about what a hurting event is, it could be physical pain, could be emotional pain, could be mental pain. There's lots of different ways to experience that, You could be rejected by another person. You could be fired from a job. You could break an arm or a leg. You could have somebody hit you, beat you up. You could fail a test in school. You could, be left at the altar thinking you're going to get married and the person just walks out of your life. We all experience pain in this life. When I grew up, I experienced lots and lots of pain, and I developed very unhealthy ways of responding to it. I developed very wrong beliefs about pain, about myself, about other people. There are people in this world that hurt other people, and there are people that do not. There's healthy people and unhealthy people. Learning how to respond to everyone, well, that's hard. Learning how to respond to hurting people, that's really hard. So in The Spirit Described the Journey, book that I wrote, it's transcriptions from my journals. I want to read today from Volume 1, Chapter 20, or chapter and verse. I want to read today from page 20, and it's simply titled, Responding to Hurting Events. Whoops. People are going to hurt me in this life. How I respond governs who I become. The chart below contrasts healthy responses and unhealthy responses. And what I have here, as you see on the screen, is a table, and it contrasts healthy and unhealthy. And I'm going to read through the healthy responses, then the unhealthy responses. I'm going to read the contrast as I go through here. So, on the left side we have healthy response. The right side we have unhealthy response. So, when I am responding to hurting events in my life, I can choose forgiveness or I can choose unforgiveness. If I choose forgiveness, then I trust God. If I choose unforgiveness, well, I distrust God. If I choose forgiveness, I'm protected by God. If I choose unforgiveness, I have no protector, or I am my protector. If I choose healthy response, healing occurs. If I choose unhealthy response, there is no healing. If I choose to forgive, pain subsides. If I choose unforgiveness, pain remains, and it's a yo-yo syndrome. It increases and decreases. It never goes away. If I forgive, I am set free. If I do not forgive, the burden increases. If I forgive, I remain vulnerable. If I do not forgive, I become protective. If I forgive, I remain open. If I do not forgive, then I seal off the hurt part so I can't be hurt again. If I choose forgiveness, I can receive God's grace. If I do not choose forgiveness, I cannot receive God's grace. If I choose forgiveness, I remain able to give and receive openly. If I choose not to forgive, I cannot give and receive completely. If I choose forgiveness, I can deal with relational challenges. If I choose unforgiveness, I want to control relational challenges. If I choose forgiveness, I'm optimistic about the future. If I choose unforgiveness, I'm pessimistic about the future. If I choose forgiveness, I sin less. If I choose unforgiveness, I sin more. If I choose forgiveness, I have peace. If I choose unforgiveness, I have anxiety. If I choose forgiveness, I love people. If I choose unforgiveness, I hate people, hurt people. If I choose forgiveness, I think together. If I choose unforgiveness, I think alone. And the last sentence I have on this page says, only I have the power to choose how I will respond. That is one of the most powerful statements in all of my journal stuff, in all these books. The Spirit Described the Journey, and all the entries. That's one of the most powerful statements. Only I have the power to choose how I will respond to hurting events. So I talked a little bit about what hurting events are, but just take a moment, maybe hit the pause button on this video, grab you a piece of paper and start making a list of hurting events that have stuck with you, things that have, that you can readily identify in your life. Like for me, a hurting event was I was 13 years old and wanted to be on a baseball team. My family was moving around a lot, and this was like the fourth move, and I got on a team, and the guys on the team, there was like 6 or 7 of them that had all played on this same teams growing up, and they were kind of a clique, and I just never fit in to their little group, and I didn't get to play much, and I got the positions nobody wanted to play, and it didn't matter how well I played. It was just, that's what you got. Another baseball related story, I got on a team where the coach's son was on the team, and he was a pitcher, and I was a good pitcher, but he wouldn't let me pitch because he wanted his son to shine. And he reached a place where he really didn't even want to put me into games. I remember my father having to argue with him that I was going to be allowed to play because I was on the team and everybody was supposed to play and stuff. And then I remember I've had relationships that have gone south on me, that I felt wounded and so on. And I've had bosses that have just treated me very, very badly. Trying to get me to quit and different things, and I have been fired from a job. On and on and on. I could list out all kinds of pain in my life, but if you think about it, you could make a list of all of the things that have happened to you that have hurt you. And like I said, there's physical pain. You could have it kicked a coffee table by accident in your bare feet and broke a toe. That's a hurting event. And some people, when that happens, they can't forgive themselves for doing something like that. Maybe you wrecked a car, you got drunk and wrecked a car and you got hurt, and you can't forgive yourself for that. Maybe you took some drugs and you had an adverse reaction to it and you can't forgive yourself. Maybe you were riding a bicycle and taking a risk going too fast down a hill and around a corner or something and fell off and hurt yourself, and you can't forgive yourself for that. That's all part of this. There's emotional pain where other people have hurt you. There is pain where you've tried to achieve something and you've failed. And then you feel like you now, are just a marked person. Other people know you failed and you're embarrassed and stuff. All kinds of hurting events. Sometimes we need to forgive others and sometimes we need to forgive ourselves. Forgiveness can be hard, but let's look at these healthy and unhealthy responses here. Forgiveness, when people hurt you, forgiveness is the healthy response. Unhealthy response is unforgiveness. It's when you hold on to the pain, you hold on to the right to have them grovel at your feet or have them have to make restitution to you. I'm not going to forgive them until they do something, They have to come and pay me back the money, or they have to come back and apologize and mean it and things. Or maybe if they did something to me, humiliated me in public, they have to, in public, then admit that and correct that wrong. If we hold on to that, it sets a path for us. And typically, if you're unforgiving about one thing, you're probably going to grow into a pattern of not forgiving other things. If you forgive, you're trusting God and letting Him deal with the situation, but you're also trusting God for your healing, for your deliverance of the pain. If you choose unforgiveness, you don't trust God. And part of that is that when we get wounded, we now know people can wound us, and we tend to not trust as easily, right? Henry Cloud calls it your trust muscle, right? We have to learn how to have a healthy and strong trust muscle. And we have to learn that through relationships where people are trustable, and so on. But we do that. And if we trust God to deal with things, then we feel protected. If we choose unforgiveness, well, now I have to protect myself. The next time I come around someone that reminds me of this person who hurt me, I have to protect myself from them, right? I have to do something to control what's happening relationally so I don't get hurt again. So I protect myself. If I choose forgiveness, I experience healing. There's something about forgiving, that letting it go, that you can experience healing. If I don't, then there's no healing. And if I choose healing, pain subsides. If I choose no healing, pain remains. And what happens is the pain kind of comes and goes. When we least expect it, the pain surfaces. We experience something with a new person in our lives that's reminiscent of this other person, and we experience that pain, and we associate that with this new person then. And that pain can color and distort relationships for the rest of our lives. If I choose forgiveness, I am set free, right? I no longer carry the burden. I no longer sitting around stewing on what happened to me and devising ways that they are supposed to correct the situation. If I choose unforgiveness, well, then I have this burden. I'm waiting for them to make it right, and they may never make it right. In fact, most of the time, people that hurt people don't make things right. If I choose forgiveness, I can remain vulnerable with people. If I choose unforgiveness, well, I become protective. As I said before, I am the protector. I cannot be vulnerable with people because it's not safe. And that's what I learned growing up. It's not safe to be vulnerable around people. And so I had to protect myself. My parents were supposed to be my protectors, and my mother was the primary person who was wounding me. She abused me physically, she abused me mentally, she abused me emotionally, and she abused me psychologically different than mentally. She made me feel like I was a bad person. Not that I was a person who did bad things. My mother made me feel like I was just bad. And she told me, or I realized once that my mother, she did that because she had so much guilt and bitterness and pain in her life that she acted out on that, and she treated people poorly, and in her mind she wanted other people to be the bad guy, and so she treated people as though they were bad so that she didn't have to feel her badness. If I remain vulnerable, then I remain open. If I am not vulnerable, if I'm protective, I seal off the hurt parts of me, right? I'm not going to let anybody touch it, not going to let anybody get close to me, because then they can hurt me. If I remain open, I can receive God's grace. If I seal off the hurt parts, I can't receive God's grace. And the reason is God's grace, His desire is to bring the healing. And you see, what happens is if you're sealing yourself off out of fear of being wounded again, and you're protecting yourself, which is really what we do, right? Then I'm not going to trust God for the healing. I'm not going to trust God to come near. I'm not going to be vulnerable with God, which is what I need to do. And so I can't receive His grace if I'm not open to Him. If I can't receive the grace, if I receive the grace, then I can deal with relational challenges, which we're going to have with every single relationship. If I can't give and receive, or can't receive God's grace, I cannot give and receive completely or openly to other people. If I can receive God's grace, I can deal with the relational challenges. If I don't receive His grace, then I want to control the relational challenges, because once again, I'm protecting myself. So I manipulate people. When I was single and God was teaching me how to know women, one of the things I became very aware of is that some women learn to protect themselves through having sex with men. And part of that is they can use sex to control the relationship. They know that men, if a woman has sex with a man over a period of time, a man will develop an attachment and a bond to her, and he will care about her. And a lot of times women want men to care about them, but they don't want to open themselves up to the love, and so they manipulate men through using sex, and so on. And so that was one of the things that God taught me about this stuff. If I receive God's grace and I forgive, I am optimistic of the future. God gives me grace. People, you can take the challenge. You can take the risk. If I don't forgive and I don't receive God's grace, I'm pessimistic about the future, pessimistic about relationships. I mean, I'm just walking around saying everybody's going to hurt me. And I see this on Facebook all the time. I look at some of the comments people make about relationships, and it's like, oh my God. I can see their pain. It's written all over it. If you forgive, you're going to sin less. If you do not forgive, you're going to sin more, because the pain drives you to behavioral actions and choices, and that can grow into patterns where you are not loving people. If I forgive, I end up having peace. If I don't forgive, I end up having anxiety because I'm fearful of what's going to happen. If I forgive, I have the ability now to love people again. If I don't forgive, I really am not willing to love people. In fact, I may hate people, and I will probably be hurting other people, because hurting people hurt people. And if you don't forgive, you end up staying in that place of pain. And the last one is that if I forgive and I can receive God's grace, I think together. I want to be in community. I want to walk with people. If I don't forgive, then I think alone. I don't want the community. I don't want vulnerable, heartfelt, good relationships. I wall myself off, and I live a life of loneliness. You ever heard the phrase, I was alone in the midst of the crowd, right? I go to a baseball game and there's 20,000 people there, and yet I'm alone. I go to the party where there's 100 or 200 people, and yet I'm alone. I go to the concert where there's 10,000 people, and yet I'm alone. I go into the mall where there's people walking around, and yet I'm alone. So I really have to circle back around to this last sentence again. And I really, want to emphasize that the main lesson God taught me through all of this was only I get to make the choice about whether I forgive or not, and only you make the decision about whether to forgive or not. Nobody can force you to forgive, because it's a heart thing. The more somebody tries to force you to forgive, the less able you're going to be to forgive, to genuinely forgive. And so only you have the power to choose how you're going to respond. And I would just tell you, folks, forgiveness is the better path. And quite often it's the hard path. It's easier to wallow in the pain. It's easier to have self-pity. It's easier to be angry. It's easier to want to get back at someone. It's easier to hurt other people than to grieve whatever happened and release it and forgive. And I would say, a thought that's come to mind that I hadn't planned on mentioning is that there is a huge difference between forgiving a person and trusting them again. With my mother, who wounded me, and I held on to my pain with her for a long time. And one of the stories I'm going to share in the future is how God gave me grace to forgive her. But after I forgave my mom, I learned there's a difference between forgiving and trusting. My mother had not changed. Even though I had changed, God's done so much stuff in my heart. He is so good to me, so good to everyone that opens their heart to him. He has healed so much in me. And after I was able to forgive my mom, I tried to have a healthy relationship with her. And I learned over about 6 months that my mom was not a safe person. I could not have a healthy relationship with her. I could not trust her with my person, with my heart. I could spend time with her, which I did the last 3 years of her life. I live in Lexington, Kentucky. She lived in Dayton, Ohio area. It was a 2.5 hour drive north. Every other weekend the last 3 years of her life, I went up to visit her because she was going to die eventually, right? She was 7 or 82, and I'm like, my mom, she ain't going to be here forever, and I don't want to go to a funeral and say I only lived a couple hours south. I could have visited more often. And I probably could have visited less. I was married, and I probably could have gone up maybe once a month or once every other month to see her, but I just, for whatever reason, I made a mental decision. In my heart, I made a decision that I'm going up every pay period. And I had friends I could stay with, so I would drive up on Friday night, go spend time with her on Saturday, and then go visit friends and stuff, and then go spend time with her on Sunday, and then come home. And I'm glad I did that. You know, I went to her funeral, and I really was glad that I had spent time with her. But I learned I could not trust her. I could not trust myself to her. I could not trust my heart to her. But I had forgiven her. I held nothing against her. So there's a difference between forgiving someone and trusting someone, and I'm not even remotely suggesting that you trust someone who has done you wrong, but you can forgive. And Jesus even said, you know, if you don't forgive, your Heavenly Father isn't going to forgive you. And so I often have to go to God and say, God, give me grace. You know, you want me to forgive and be like you. Give me grace to forgive. And he puts his heart into me, he breathes his spirit into me, and he changes my heart, and I can let go of things and move forward. So this is John Pearson with Before Eternity. I'm really glad that you stopped by. Kind of an intense video this time, but I hope it spoke to you and that you gained some insight from this. If you like the chart and stuff, it's in the book, page 20, Spirit Described the Journey, Volume 1. It's on Amazon if you want to go pick up a copy. So I want to leave you with this thought. Go and bless God and bless others. In the name of Jesus, amen.